I remember that when they announced the episode titles for the first season of the What If series, the episode that generated the most anticipation. Without a doubt, it was the Marvel Zombies episode since everyone seemed to want to see it. And I remember that at the time it seemed curious to me because I felt that the Marvel Zombies comic was a story that was heavily criticized, particularly because of the grotesque way it presents iconic heroes like Spider-Man and Captain America. Honestly, I didn't expect so many people to be interested in a Marvel Zombies episode. However, even though the comic didn't do very well in sales originally, or actually, just imagine, it was the 56th best-selling title that month. Eventually, it became a much more popular title, which had several sequels and spin-offs, because it turns out that this combination of superheroes and zombies is quite popular. For example, the story Blackest Night by Green Lantern, a comic where dead superheroes come back thanks to the Black Power Rings. It became the best-selling event of 2009. Meanwhile, the event Deceased, a story that combines the concept of zombies and the anti-life equation of Darkseid, was in the top 5 best-selling stories of 2019. But why are these stories so popular? That's what we're going to talk about in this video, as we'll analyze these comics that mix zombies and superheroes to find common patterns, tropes, and certain archetypal traits. To find out, my name is Go the Geek Monitor, and today we're going to take superheroes and zombies very seriously. How much time do you spend online each day? If you're like me, it's probably a lot, so why not make money from it? Before we dive into the topic, I want to tell you about HoneyGain, an app that lets you earn money by sharing the internet connection you're not using. It's like renting your unused internet, and HoneyGain can't access your personal data, only you can. Antivirus programs like McAfee and Windows Defender consider it safe, and it uses so little of your connection you won't notice any slowdown. What is it for? They use that internet you don't use for safe tasks, like checking website statistics and making sure ads work properly on pages. How much money can you make? Honestly, it won't make you rich, but it's passive income that's great for covering a streaming service, a comic, or a small treat. How do you do it? Getting started is easy. Just click the link in the video description and sign up. Because the app is only available after you sign up, and if you use my code, you instantly earn $3 just like that simply for signing up and using my code. After that, install the app on any device. It can be a phone, computer, or tablet. Just let it run in the background and that's it. There's also something called Lucky Pot, which is like a daily roulette where you can win up to $100. So take advantage of this opportunity because HoneyGain is a great option to get the most out of your internet. Now let's get back to the topic. Let me ask you something. Are zombies closer to supernatural horror or science fiction? Today, we usually link them to science fiction. Since in most of the current famous stories, from The Last of Us to The Walking Dead and 28 Days Later, the zombie epidemic is explained through a scientific phenomenon like a virus or the cordyceps fungus, or it's even mentioned that it's a disease with characteristics similar to rabies. The point is that it's a phenomenon we understand and relate to scientific concepts. But at first it wasn't like that, since zombies were originally linked to the supernatural, particularly to Afro-Caribbean mysticism. The zombie concept originates from Haitian folklore, where it was believed voodoo sorcerers could resurrect the dead to feel it in their slave without will. In fact, that's how zombies were originally portrayed in cinema. In the 1932 movie White Zombie starring Bela Lugosi. How did the concept change? We owe that to the filmmaker George Romero, since in his film Night of the Living Dead from 1968 the concept was renewed, and he presented us with a story where the dead come back to life. Not through magic, but by scientific methods, in this case, space radiation. Keep in mind this isn't fully confirmed in the film, it's only presented as a theory. What's interesting is that, despite the change, zombie is often used to represent bigger fears or problems. Originally, it represented the fear that someone could take away your will. George Romero later used it as a critique of consumerist society. And other stories like The Last of Us tell us that in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, maybe humans are even more dangerous in their struggle to survive. And this type of origin, more focused on science fiction, is picked up in zombie and superhero stories. For example, in the Marvel Zombies series, we're told that the infection comes from the quantum realm. I'm Knight from the Black Power Rings, and my favorite version is from the Deceased comic. Here we're told that the virus is born when Darkseid's anti-life equation merges with the death energy of Black Razor, which results in a virus that's both technological and organic. That is, one that spreads both through fluids like saliva and blood, and through technological means like screens connected to the internet. Now that we better understand zombies and their evolution, we should ask, why are zombie and superhero stories so appealing? And to find out, we have to look at what all these stories have in common. One of the most appealing aspects of zombie and superhero stories is, without a doubt, the concept of the corruption of the ideal. Think of it this way. We usually see superheroes as these unattainable and pure figures who are different from us because they use their powers to do good without being corrupted by them. Zombie stories are different, like in the comic Marvel Zombies. The infected keep their personality, memories, and powers, but the infection gives them an overwhelming sense of hunger, which clouds any moral trait they have. That's why we see characters like Peter Parker consume Aunt May and Mary Jane without being able to do anything about it. The interesting thing about this concept is that their hunger is completely irrational. Because in the same comic, they tell you that the infected don't actually need to consume food to survive. In some cases, they don't even have a stomach to digest anymore. We even see some of them consuming small parts of themselves just to keep the hunger at bay. And when they do, and the hunger eases a bit, they conserve resources. That's why we see characters like Spider-Man suffer for their actions in the comic Blackest Night. On the other hand, this corruption of the ideal happens because the Black Power rings revive heroes from the past, but as puppets of the Black Lanterns. That's why we see heroic figures fighting against their own friends, and we even see them say hurtful things because they're trying to provoke intense emotions in their victims, which speaks more of an emotional hunger than a physical one. If you notice, these stories cause us a mix of fascination and repulsion. On one hand, it's interesting to see characters that we usually see as unreachable, given just as we would to temptations represented by hunger. But at the same time, if the story is very graphic, it can result in a somewhat unpleasant experience. Because superheroes are usually seen as an ideal to reach, so seeing them this way can cause us some repulsion. Do you like those stories where an ideal is corrupted? In the case of the Marvel Zombies comic, it's certainly strange to see Spider-Man or Captain America act this way, but since it's an alternate universe, it doesn't really bother me. However, it's also true that many of the characters act very strangely, even when they're not infected. For example, we see how Reed Richards infects his own family, because he comes to the conclusion that zombies are the perfect organism, so it makes sense for the Fantastic Four to transition into being zombies. But tell me, how could one of the smartest men on that planet reach that conclusion since zombies are driven by hunger? At least that was true at first. Although later on we're told that if you restrain a zombie for long enough, the hunger will eventually subside, after a painful withdrawal process. So later on, we see zombies living perfectly well with humans. Although honestly, I do prefer this narrative of the ideal being corrupted by temptation, in this case the hunger we saw in Marvel. Zombies. Since here the zombies are presented as characters who retain their abilities, but in general, they do become monsters without personality, with some exceptions like Wanda Maximoff. In my opinion, they removed the only thing that made Marvel Zombies interesting, the critique of consumption. And at the same time, they focus on giving us a more basic story of heroes versus monsters, which isn't bad either, but that means the story has to be good, right? For me, that wasn't the case with the Marvel Zombies series. Another interesting aspect of this story is seeing friends become enemies. There's a line in the comic The Ceased that sums up very well one of the worst things about a zombie apocalypse, because Lois Lane says, "The hardest part of dealing with the infected was detaching myself." The infected couldn't be people, they couldn't be colleagues, they couldn't be dear friends. This is usually the most heartbreaking part in zombie stories. Those moments when a person is forced to fight or eliminate their dearest loved ones. At the same time, they struggle to understand the idea that they're no longer really in that body. In The Ceased, for example, we see Superman locking up Jonathan Kent, Black Canary eliminating Green Lantern, and even Alfred taking extreme measures against Batman. This narrative point is common in this type of story, but others add interesting twists to the concept. Such is the case of the episode Men Against Fire from Black Mirror, where we see a group of soldiers fighting against monsters they call roaches. But then comes the plot twist. They're not monsters, but people. People who are considered genetically inferior, but who are perceived by the soldiers as monsters. Because of a neural implant, they have to make them more effective in combat, since in the episode they mention that humans are empathetic beings by nature. So by dehumanizing the enemy, it's easier for the soldiers to pull the trigger. In this way, we can see how one of the most frequent themes in zombie stories has to do with the dehumanization of people, and how do we deal with it. Similarly, in these types of superhero stories with zombies, one of the greatest dangers is precisely the fact of seeing powerful characters getting infected. And here these characters face a heroic dilemma, since they can choose not to intervene. Like Batman asked Flash and Wally West not to expose themselves to infection, or decide to help people, knowing that they will most likely end up causing more harm than good. So in these stories, we often see extremely powerful characters like Thor or Flash getting infected and another group of heroes trying to figure things out. How to neutralize those who were once their most powerful allies. And I think this is exactly another part of the appeal of this kind of story. Since, as often happens in an alternate Earth, they can afford to have major consequences and deaths. In the Marvel Zombies comic, we see a future where infected superheroes destroy nearly all life in the universe, thanks to the abilities of Silver Surfer, who also got sliced up, while T'Challa becomes the leader of the few humans who managed to survive on Earth. In the Marvel Zombies series, we see how some humans survive in a zombie-infested world quarantined by the Nova Corps to ensure no one escapes. And in the Seast, we saw the Detective Comics Trinity die and a new generation of heroes emerge, led by characters like John Kent, Damian Wayne, and Black Canary, with the power of the Green Lantern, guiding the surviving humans in a new world. This shows us that these kinds of stories often break away from the eternal present that is constantly lived in comics. That reality of the main comic book line, which gives you an illusion of change and evolution, but rarely actually moves forward. We've seen Spider-Man repeatedly return to his original form while also being introduced to new superheroes, from a less idealistic point of view, which can be a very appealing approach for many people. And I think that's the secret behind this kind of stories. By combining zombies and superheroes, we not only get darker versions of the characters we know, but we also get a story where the rules are broken. Stories where there are real consequences, abrupt endings for several characters, and above all, uncertainty. Because in this kind of stories, the heroes don't win, or at least they don't do it without losing a lot along the way, which can be very appealing, especially for new readers who want to read something simple that doesn't need much context, that has great moments, and above all, deaths, right? Because there are times when you want an aspirational and idealistic story, and other times when you just want to see the world burn and ideals get corrupted. In the end, that's okay, right? Before you go, I'd love for you to tell me if you like zombie and superhero stories and which ones you recommend the most. Subscribing to my channel would help me a lot if you enjoy video essays and serious takes on superheroes. That's all for today. I'm Go the Geek Monitor. Keep looking beyond the obvious.